In the 75th year of India's independence, how much do we really know about our freedom fighters? Sure, we've read about the headline-grabbing icons in our history textbooks long ago. But what about the millions of men and women who made this moment of Azadi possible? On the program today, we look at a fascinating new book by veteran journalist P Sainath. Mr. Sainath actually chronicles and profiles the stories of the men and women he calls India's last heroes. People we should have heard about, people who should have been recognized as freedom fighters, but had not been. Whether they are homemakers or farmers, Hindus or Muslims, Dalits or OBCs. These stories span all communities and really, in a sense, capture the pluralism of India, that very essence of India on which Free India, this nation, was founded. It's been a delight and an education to read some of these stories. And I'm very pleased to have with us P Sainath today as we discuss his new book. As I said, I could actually see a kind of full Netflix series in my mind, but I was astonished actually at how little I knew, how many extraordinary women there were who were part of this. How did you discover these people?
Well, even in 1997, Barkha, first of all, what drove me to this was that 75th year and the realization that bothers me greatly, that the present generation and those to follow will never ever see, meet, talk to, engage with, listen to a bona fide freedom fighter who helped bring this country its independence. And in 5 to 6 years, that golden generation, those who fought for our freedom, will be gone. The youngest person alive now in the book is 97 and in great energy and zeal. And the oldest is 104, Babani Mahato of Purulia, who'll turn 105 in a couple of months, I expect. So it bothers me greatly that our kids will never get to see that. If you look at the government's celebration, the Azadi Ke Amrit Mahotsav, you will not find, I could not, on the homepage, a single photo, a single story, a single video, a single statement, a single anything of a living freedom fighter. You know whose photos you'll find, right? From here, from websites to gas cylinders, that's the photo. And it's the second thing is that I think that their stories need to be told. One, they have a right to have their stories told. And two, you and I, we need their stories in order to better script our own. That is what brought about this book. And I also have to tell you that by background, I never trained in a journalism school ever. I was trained as a historian. I teach at journalism schools for 35 years.
But you are one of the most compelling storytellers of our time. And I think your classic, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, I was reading is in its 56th reprint. So clearly there's something you know how to do that we all need to learn from. But let's get to the book. Whether it's the Tufan Sena, a district that declares its independence from the British and has its own armed wing, whether it is an Adivasi woman who leads a counterattack against the British, whether it is Bhagat Singh Jugia, not to be confused with Shaheed Bhagat Singh, with a following so iconic that even an extremist, a terrorist, as he comes for him, decides he cannot shoot him. These are stories that we should have known and we don't. And one of the points that you make is that freedom fighters in India are recognized only by those, please correct me if I'm wrong, who are registered for pensions. And as one of your iconic freedom fighters in the book says, we fought for freedom, not for pensions.
Absolutely. And the criteria laid out there exclude tens of millions of human beings, especially they exclude women. If you read the law of 1980, the Swatantrata Sainik Samman Yojana, everywhere where they're talking about survivors, they're talking about widow, not spouse. So the assumption is that the freedom fighter is a man. Second, the criteria are so structured that it's all about going to prison, being declared a proclaimed offender by the British Raj. In fact, you're asking the colonial power to certify who your freedom fighters were. Those who voluntarily went underground are not are excluded, uh, explicitly excluded. It says those who went on the directions of some party leadership don't count. Only if the British came after you as a proclaimed defender. Now, you can immediately see what that does to the millions of women who took extraordinary risks. You know, every time I spoke to Babani or Lakshmi Panda, I kept asking myself, in their situation, would I have had the courage to do what they did? And I didn't like the answer. Yeah, so we,
Talk a
yeah.
little bit more about the women. There are incredible stories in this book. A woman who uses a slingshot as her weapon of resistance. A woman who crosses a river in disguise and hiding. A woman who leads, as I said, a counterattack against an armed unit of the British and never finds her name even in the village memorial that is, in fact, a commemoration of those who fought the British. And then women who were children when they were in camps of the Indian National Army cooking for the soldiers who never get recognized. And then the women whose men went out to fight, but who were left to fend for everything themselves, who ask you, what about the absent partner? What about the absent husband? There's so much granularity to what women went through in the freedom movement. So I want you to talk a little bit about the women you met.
I think the most powerful question put to me in the course of these 20 years of talking and meeting people came from Lakshmi Panda, who, as you said, at the age of 13, joined the INA's moving forest camp kitchens. And she just told me in anger, just because I never went to jail, just because I never fired a bullet at anyone, though I trained with a rifle, just because I, wasn't captured or imprisoned, and just because I was cooking in the camps which were being bombed by the British, does that mean I was not a freedom fighter? Does that mean I made no contribution to my country's freedom and independence? It just, Purushottam Thakur, one of your former colleagues from another avatar, and he and we were just blown away. It disturbed me enormously because everything she said was true. It is structured. And then I remembered at that time I was covering the agrarian crisis, 1998 to 2000 ongoing. And the same thing happens to women in every sector. In the farmers' suicides list, 80%, 90% of women's suicides are excluded because we don't accept women as farmers. They are farmers' wives or daughters or sisters or mothers. They're not. And because less than 8% of Indian women in the countryside have land in their names. So when you can look at that, you can look at a number of other criteria where we said as a society, our structures, our patriarchy excludes women. In the freedom struggle, many of them did not go to jail. They were doing far more dangerous things than sitting on satyagraha and going to a jail, like Hausa Tai Patil. Okay, some of these stories, doing them was exhilarating. With a Hausa Tai, the mischief with which, what a beautiful story she told about the drama they stage outside the police station in Sangli, it just killed us too. And she was a great storyteller. Malu Swarajam, she had a temper, Barkha. She had you could see the warrior in her. And as a journalist, sometimes you're going to have to ask dumb questions. for the sake of the audience. She got so mad that she stood up and started swinging the slingshot. Okay, so these stories were exhilarating.
And
Saliha, I tell you honestly, four grown guys, very noisy, very. We left her and we traveled the next 140 kilometers in silence and in tears. I could not believe that someone had made these sacrifices so unhesitatingly, and we as a society could treat her as we did. You know, when I go, the only thing I could write then was a bloody jingle. I could not write that story for just about ever. I could not write that story. Every time I choked up each time I remembered how she spoke, what she said. And when we went back again 20 years later, this year, I went back to her and saw her grandnephew ran away on seeing me approach because he told me, "You're in a Jeep, obviously, your forest department." And the same fights that Salihan had, her great grandchildren are having. So each of these women were special. Babani, who told, when I told her, it must have been difficult when your husband went off to jail for 13 months. She said, actually, it was much worse when he came back. He brought even more people for me to feed. Okay. I mean, each one of these women was such a character, such a character. And, well, what do you say? I mean, how many more are there? How many more are there whose stories we don't have?
And the fascinating chapter on Malu Swarajyam, where she's addressing a group of techies many years later, and she's demonstrating to them how she used the slingshot, but she's also talking to them about Occupy Wall Street. So, that was just extraordinary to think of this. I think she was in her 80s, you said, when she was talking about all of this. And all of them have remained very Gandhian. I use that word loosely here, to only say without bitterness, without complaints, without a sense of betrayal. Where do you think that extraordinary generosity towards the Indian state came from?
Malu Swarajyam was 84 when she did that. And I will say one thing, that generation as a whole, in the Telu and Loki Mahato story, I've expanded on it and said it. I found a generation we should not pigeonhole. They were open to so many influences. If I have to sum up the people in my book ideologically, politically, I would say, and I realized this as we were doing it, so many of them, maybe a whole section of that generation, were leftist by political persuasion, Gandhian by moral code. Gandhi was this distant, overwhelming figure. So the ones in Purulia, their immediate hero was Subhash Chandra Bose. But yet there was this awe of Gandhi, which kept them good. They tell me that it was a strong moral driving force. Many Indian left leaders themselves were like this. EMS Namboodiripad had a photograph of Gandhi always in his office. One of the most original mind of the Indian communist movement. So I would say leftist by political persuasion, Gandhian by personal example, principle, and moral code. Now, the most beautiful. Yeah?
There for a second. Yes. Yet there's this chapter where one of your freedom fighters says, "Why must I choose between Gandhi and Ambedkar?" There's another part of the book where you actually talk about these freedom fighters being atheists, believers, leftists, Gandhians, people who believed in militant the use of armed struggle as opposed to Gandhi's non-violent. And I was just struck by the fact that in this age of polarization, where ideologies are dividing people because there's no unifying larger cause, one of the takeaways for me was this, that people were able to put whatever other differences they have, they were able to take a step back from that because there was something larger to believe.
Barkha, in 2017, we held a meeting. People's Archive of Rural India held a meeting along with the All India Kisan Sabha to felicitate the living freedom fighters of Sangli. At that time, there were 21, the Tufan Sena guys and women. I took Gopal Gandhi there. Now, you know, the old armed revolutionaries who stood up, broke with Gandhi after 1942, quit India, was called off. They were in tears. And every one of them wanted to go up and hug Gandhi's grandson. It brought tears to all of us also. It brought all of us to tears. That all these guys in their 90s, they came ill, brought from 200 miles away, 300 miles away. They came to the place because Gandhi's grandson was coming, and they just wanted to touch him and hold him. Okay, that was very moving. Yeah, so we had all these people. Hausatai was there, Captain Bhau was there. Captain Bhau, that old cantankerous warrior, his tears were flowing when he saw Gopal Gandhi. And these were people who had, differed with Gandhi, moved away after the Quit India movement, the declaration of Satara's independence and secession. Many of these were groups disillusioned with Gandhi's Quit India. Yeah, but there was a bond that rose above that. As you said, they could simply somehow come together across barriers of language, culture, politics, divisions, different political persuasions. Some went into the Peasant Workers' Party, the Peasants and Workers' Party. Many went into the Communist Party, like Hausatai's father did. He was an MP once. It's very moving how they place that main fight above everything else. Shobharam is the most fascinating. He is the only one. He is the one who criticized Gandhi and is a self-declared undying guardian. Okay, you look at the complexity of it. And he told me, देखो, मैंने दोनों नदियां में गया, गांधीवाद or Krantivad. I love that phrase. It is the first time I have ever heard anyone say that. मैंने दोनों तरफ गया, Gandhivad or Krantivad. We Jayanti, and he said, क्या आपके पास गाड़ी है ना? I said, yes, sir. He said, बाबा साहब का मूर्ति में जाएंगे अजमेर मार्केट में. आज उनका जन्म एनिवर्सरी है, माला लगाना है. That's where I drew some courage and asked him, how do you choose? And he got angry. Yeah, I knew that I had already judged his character and temperament. And he said, why should I choose? You choose. Tu kar lo. He said, those principles of the Mahatma that appealed to me, I followed those. Those principles of Ambedkar that I admired, I followed those. And he had one very good crack, about the contemporary. So I said, where are you? I said, but politically you said you're a congressman. He said, देखो, my congressman who, लेकिन असली Congress, by which he meant dissident. Okay, asli, by that he meant dissident. So and Mallu Swarajam's most beautiful line to the techies. By the way, the techies were blown away by the fact that a person who didn't speak one word in English could speak so well about Occupy Wall Street. And she told them, when they asked her by the way, they gave her 3 standing ovations, an audience aged between 21 and 26. And she told them, when they asked her, what can we do? She said, the slingshot was my weapon. The laptop and the mobile phone are yours. Use them to fight for justice.
Really extraordinary. In the end, I want you to talk a little bit about Bhagat Singh Jugian from Hoshiarpur, and dies in his 90s till the very end, is active, is aware, and breaks down or gets emotional only when he talks about partition and what happens to his friends and the rupture of that moment. Very, very moving chapter, but also this extraordinary account of how this is, cut to the 80s. Punjab is burning, the Khalistanis are on the rampage, and you write about how it was not unusual for the police to actually encourage families to arm themselves, to fight the extremists, to fight the terrorists. And this moment comes when Bhagat Singh Jugia's family has to do that. And then one of these men who's coming for them actually recognizes him and says, I will not harm him. I mean, it's an amazing story. So talk a little bit about him.
That was a terrible time. And by the way, the police not only encouraged some families to arm themselves, the government even helped them with arms, but they gave them rather dated weapons. So the families preferred to go out and buy or borrow their own weapons. The Khalistani militant who came in that squad, Bhagat Singh, a man who dropped out of school or was kicked out of school after third standard, it always remained with him that children should go to school. So he helped all the kids in his village, kept telling them, go to school, go here, and would help them, talk to them. He was an encyclopedia on a number of things without having gone to school a single day after class 3. One of the kids he helped was the younger brother of this Khalistani militant. And that boy got a job. And I think around the 90s, 94, became a patwari, in the village, in one of the villages. So there were these human bonds beyond the ideological divides. And when this chap saw that the name on the tube well saying Bhagat Singh Jugia, he said, if it is that Jugia, I will not do a thing. I'm leaving. And he persuaded the others to withdraw as well. He said, this man has helped my family. He didn't ask me who I was, what I was. They could see these guys arguing from the rooftop, and then everybody withdrew. It's the power of not only his charisma, but of human bonds rising above hatreds.
I was, in the end, there's so much to be inspired by, but I was also struck by the fact that so many of these extraordinary heroes and their families continue to live in poverty, if not penury. There are families who don't even have a photograph of the iconic heroes of their family because some journalist, some city slicker came and took them away. People like myself. That story gave me pause. I mean, I don't remember ever having taken away photographs and not returning them, but that the family didn't even have a photograph. But the penury, the poverty, not just the fact that they're unsung, but that they haven't had easy lives even after independence. Let's close with that thought. I mean, what can we do to change this?
Let's talk about those journalists for a bit. This happened even during the farm suicides. When the epidemic of farm suicides began, I was in Kerala, of all places, where people do have photographs, and the family told me we don't have any. That journalist came, he took it away, he said he'll send it back. You know why the journalist was doing that, Barkha? Exclusivity, to prevent the next journalist who landed up from getting the photograph with his or her story. That is so bloody annoying. I mean, you come close to violence in your head, at least when you know. And that's what those journalists did to Salihan. I mean, I think in the case of Salihan, it was not competitiveness. It was just callousness. As she's a poor Adivasi woman. What is that family ever going to do? The only photos they have now of her are what I took in the earliest trip in 2002. I think that what do we do? See, I personally believe, and I think that our entire approach to the idea of who is a freedom fighter is wrong. Our entire, like for instance, Barkha, if you were tomorrow to visit, as I'm sure you do, a college or a university and give a lecture, if you were to ask kids, make your list of top 5 freedom fighters of India, you will see almost no one will name Ambedkar as a freedom fighter. And yet, that infuriates me because I believe the Constitution of India is the distillation, the essence, the finest essence of the ideals of our freedom struggle. And if the chief craftsperson of that Constitution is not listed amongst your greatest freedom fighters, that definition becomes meaningless. That bugs me no end. And it's coming to your point, it's that very Constitution, not just its fundamental rights, which are, being scattered and torn like confetti these days, but the directive principles of state policy. To the best of my knowledge, there are only 2 constitutions in the world that have a vision of what should be, not just do's and don'ts. The Irish Constitution after the Irish uprising, the first Irish Republic, and we drew it from there, by the way. We drew it from the Irish. My own granddad was caught up in the Irish uprising and was expelled and lucky not to be shot dead. And those principles, I still believe, are what we can unite Indians on, rather than the manifesto of any one political party. All those freedom fighters, they fought for justice, social, economic, political, which is in your preamble. They fought against inequality, and it drives me off the cliff when I think that the entire struggle was against the humiliation, indignity, and hyper inequality imposed by colonialism. 24 famines the British brought your country. People died in millions of hunger, famine, plague, pestilence. And in your 75th anniversary of independence, you lower your flag to mourn the death of the symbol of that oppression. You never lowered your flag for the great freedom fighters when they died, but you did it for this.
That is quite a thought to close with. Thank you, P Sainath, for this book. Really, it's easy, accessible. When I say easy, it's not easy to read and process what these people went through. But one of the things that I think is so important about this book is that it is accessible, if you know what I mean. And that's important. It's taken a lot of work. I don't mean to undermine that. But, I remember my journalism teacher who used to say that there has to be a lot of work going into telling a simple story about extraordinary people. And these are simple stories about extraordinary lives. And I just hope that more and more people get to know them, and they're disseminated in every form, cinema, web series, this book. The other interesting thing about this book, by the way, before I close, is there's a QR code at the end of every chapter. This is truly a multimedia project. Once the back end of this project is up, you can actually scan these codes. It will take you to a website where you can see more pictures, read more, maybe even capture videos. So it's an interactive book in that way. Thank you so much, Mr. Sainath. Congratulations. Really such a moving read. I read it in one go and learned so much from it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Barkha. Thank you.
Bye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.